He's infamous for allegations of unabashed misogyny, presenting himself as a messiah for disillusioned men, and yes, an unsettling history with minors. Of course, I'm talking about Muhammad, the founder of Islam. But today's video isn't about him. It's about one of his followers, and at one point, the most Googled man on the planet, Andrew Tate. If you haven't heard of him, congratulations. You've probably been living a peaceful life off the grid, away from Wi-Fi and terrible TikTok edits. And to be fair to him, when I too first got exposed to his videos, I genuinely thought he was just another David Goggins-esque motivational speaker. A lot of his videos on getting fit, successful, and not being lazy resonated with me, just as it did for a lot of young men. This was before I knew who he was and what he really did for a living. It's usually well hidden away under a facade of Bugattis, cigars, beautiful women, and messaging that appeals to disillusioned men. If there's one thing that's true about Andrew Tate, it's that he's a fantastic marketer. But like all good magic tricks, the sleight of hand is where the real story begins. Behind the Bugattis is a man who's made headlines for all the wrong reasons. Headlines that include words like human trafficking, organized crime, Romanian prison, and minors. Not exactly what you would expect from someone who claims to stand for traditional values, unless those values are from way back in the Middle Ages. In hindsight, the fact that these brothers lived in Romania of all places should have immediately made me question what kind of business opportunities they were chasing. Not exactly the motivational arc I was expecting. In Romania, Tate and his brother Tristan are facing charges of human trafficking, sexual exploitation, and forming an organized crime group. The allegations are as serious as they're horrifying, with prosecutors presenting testimonies from multiple women who claim they were coerced into making explicit content. And if that doesn't scream role model, I don't know what does. In the UK, things aren't much better. Tate has a history of accusations involving the R word and assault that stretch back to his pre-influencer days. Whatever happens with his case in Romania, he's also to be extradited to the UK to face charges as well. He even got kicked off the reality show Big Brother in 2016 when producers learned about the police investigations. Imagine being too problematic for Big Brother. Yet somehow, despite everything, Andrew Tate has managed to build a disturbingly loyal fan base. A fan base full of young men who see him as a beacon of truth in a world they're convinced is rigged against them. So much so that they're willing to subscribe to Tate's online school, The Real World, where apparently you beat the Matrix by dropshipping from Alibaba. For $50 a month, of course. And then, in a twist no one saw coming, not even a Matrix, Andrew Tate announced that he had converted to Islam. Now on paper, this mostly doesn't make sense. Just take a look at his previous takes.
What's your religion?
It's kind of like an interesting hybrid. When I'm in Dubai, I'm happy to be Muslim, and when I'm in Romania, I'm happy to be Christian.
Are the real Muslims because they do exactly what the book says.
Islamic extremism is a Muslim problem. It's absolutely a Muslim problem.
But if you know anything about the religion of Islam, it actually makes perfect sense. Let's start with the basics. The Red Pill movement, Tate's spiritual homeland, is all about traditional masculinity, patriarchal hierarchies, and a deep, borderline obsessive disdain for anything that empowers women. It's a worldview that argues men should be dominant, women should be subservient, and society's downfall can be blamed on, well, women not knowing their place. Subtle, right? Now let's compare this with Islam, a religion that finds the mere notion of a woman not covered head to toe offensive. A religion where the founder had 11 wives, sex slaves, forbade co-mingling, and proudly claimed that women were deficient in intelligence. A religion where God himself commanded men to beat their wives for disobedience. Islam perhaps is the only example in the modern age that still emphasizes extremely rigid gender roles, male authority in the family, and rules that control women's behavior, clothing, and autonomy. It truly is a match made in misogyny. For Andrew Tate and his followers, Islam's patriarchal structure isn't a bug, it's a feature. It provides a divine justification for the same ideas that have been peddling all along, that men are leaders and women should know their role. And unlike the red pill, which can be dismissed as internet pseudo-philosophy, Islam comes with the weight of scripture, 1,000 years of history and tradition, making it the ultimate shield against criticism. For Andrew Tate, however, This isn't about ideological alignment. No, there's a much more calculated play at work here. It's effectively a marketing masterstroke, a strategic pivot designed to serve three key purposes: rebranding, expansion, and protection. Firstly, at the heart of Tate's popularity, quite a lot of his history and how he made all his wealth started coming to public light. There's no doubt the Tate brothers ran cam studios. They were highly successful producers of porn, targeting the same men they claim should return to more pure, traditional values while profiting off the very vices they preach against. In fact, he was teaching these young men how to run similar businesses through his PhD course. Yes, that stood for Pimping Hose Degree.
Pimping Hose Degree, PhD, yeah. And that was about me teaching how I managed females in those scenarios. How I controlled their emotions, how I convinced them to work and give me most of them.
In this course, Tate openly detailed how to recruit women into webcam work, often using manipulative tactics like the lover boy method, where romantic relationships were weaponized to convince women to participate. Essentially, he wasn't just running the business, he was franchising the exploitation. So let me ask you, does this sound like the traditional family values in Islam? Of course not. However, to appeal to this new base, converting to Islam works really well. Why? Because Islam has a concept of starting fresh, a clean slate. In Islamic theology, converting to Islam erases all prior sins. The idea is that embracing the faith is a transformative act, one that washes away the past, no matter how questionable or sordid. It's a spiritual reboot, if you will. For someone like Tate, with a history of legal and moral controversies, this is incredibly convenient. It's a full-blown rebranding campaign blessed by God himself. Tate's past as a self-proclaimed pimp and corn producer becomes irrelevant because, in his new narrative, he's no longer that person. He's now a devout Muslim, fighting against the moral corruption of the modern world. So, what about his new audience? An audience that already believes much of what he preaches, only framed as divine revelation, is perfectly primed to become new recruits for the real world. Speaking of audiences, if you're enjoying this video so far, please hit that subscribe button and give the video a thumbs up. In many Muslim-majority countries, patriarchal norms are deeply entrenched, often positioning men as unquestioned heads of households. This societal structure can create a sense of entitlement among men, and for those unable to meet these cultural expectations of dominance and success, it breeds frustration. Adding to this is a pervasive sexual repression. Premarital relationships are forbidden, and discussions about sex are often taboo, leaving young men without healthy outlets for their sexual and emotional needs. Which is ironic because Andrew Tate almost certainly doesn't follow the rules forbidding such things today. This type of environment can lead to the development of incel subcultures, where misogynistic attitudes may fester and women are unjustly blamed for men's frustrations, also known as Tate's entire shtick. Of course, eventually their family steps in to fix things by finding them a wife, who also happens to be their cousin. Romantic, right? For men raised in environments where rigid gender roles and moral policing are the norm, Tate's narrative doesn't just resonate, it feels like a solution. Not only does it impact the men in these societies, but it makes life for women even worse. Look at the rankings in the Global Gender Gap Index 2024. It's no coincidence that several of the lowest ranked countries, like Yemen, Pakistan, and Saudi Arabia, are either predominantly Muslim or governed by conservative Islamic norms. These societies often reinforce patriarchal structures that disadvantage women economically, politically, and socially. For women, this translates into a harsh reality. Limited access to education, restricted workforce participation, and deeply entrenched cultural and legal barriers are the norm. For example, Saudi Arabia, ranked 126th out of 146, only recently allowed women to drive and still imposes strict guardianship laws that limit their autonomy. Similarly, Afghanistan has seen significant rollbacks in women's rights under the Taliban, barring women from education and many public spaces. And this is what Andrew Tate had to say about the Taliban. Or how about this? It's really that sense of authority, the promise of power that Tate seems to offer his followers that makes him so appealing, particularly in that part of the world. Before his apparent conversion to Islam, he actually spoke about exactly why this part of Islam was so appealing to him. Just take a look at these. Or look at this, where he might have actually revealed the reason for his conversion way before his arrest. Or how about this one? He was certainly behaving like a Muslim before converting too. And as you can see, he totally respects Muslims and Christians. On top of all this, the Muslim population is massive, a built-in audience that spans continents. And let's not forget the rampant victimhood mentality that often permeates parts of the Islamic world. For many, Tate isn't just a controversial figure, he's a misunderstood hero, a man who's been persecuted for speaking the truth. His arrest and legal troubles? Proof of the so-called Matrix conspiring to silence him. This has now elevated him to martyr status. The top G is now devout Muslim, bravely standing against the West's moral decay. To his new audience, this makes him almost untouchable, a symbol of resistance against a system they believe oppresses them and their values. And Tate knows exactly how to play this role. He positions himself as a warrior for faith and tradition, while conveniently sidestepping the fact that his past ventures, Cam Studios, his PhD cause, and his blatant objectification of women are the antithesis of the values he now claims to uphold. There's been a lot made about his praise of Dubai as well. In fact, Romanian authorities have evidence that one of his alleged victims was blackmailed and threatened to make explicit content, and now she has been transported to Dubai, which is also where his Bugatti currently is. Let's be real, it's starting to look less like coincidence and more like a carefully laid plan. The Tate brothers have always been about strategy, and escaping to a city that's basically a billionaire's fortress makes perfect sense. After all, Dubai has a reputation, a playground for the wealthy, with minimal questions asked about how you got your money or your criminal charges. But there's more to it than just luxury. Dubai offers something Tate desperately needs right now: protection. Not just for his assets, but for himself. The UAE doesn't have extradition treaties with many countries, and its legal system can be accommodating, especially if you've got the cash to grease the wheels. So, is it likely that the Tates were planning to relocate there all along? Absolutely. I mean, it's hard to imagine they saw Romania as their final destination, but Dubai, for the Muslim world's persecuted frontman, definitely a possibility as to why he ended up converting. So why does this all matter? Because the impact of figures like Andrew Tate on young men is both pervasive and deeply concerning. Tate provides a worldview, a dangerously simplified, hyper-masculine narrative that resonates with those feeling lost or alienated. And let's face it, the numbers don't lie. A 2023 survey found that nearly 45% of British males aged 16 to 24 had a positive view of Tate. That's almost half of a generation seeing this man accused of trafficking and exploitation as some kind of role model. Meanwhile, just 1% of women in the same age group felt the same. You don't need a sociology degree to spot the problem there. Add to this divine revelation, and he almost becomes some sort of off-brand televangelist for insecure dudes. Except this time, he's got the likes of Muhammad Hijab right next to him, Quran in hand. The consequences are far-reaching. Research links exposure to misogynistic ideologies with increased acceptance of gender-based violence and a decline in empathy towards women. Think about what that means. A generation of young men being conditioned to see dominance as virtue and equality as a threat. For those watching in the West, do we really want the values practiced in Islamic countries, many of which are failed states by the way, to dictate how society views their female population? A world where women are stripped of their autonomy, confined to roles dictated by outdated patriarchal norms, and often treated as second-class citizens. Because that's the logical conclusion of glorifying figures like Andrew Tate and the ideologies he conveniently cherry-picks. Especially now that he's tying it to Islam. I was born in a country like this, where these same tropes are drilled into us in schools and institutions. Even today, women aren't seen as equals. But perhaps what truly bugs me about this whole thing is that Andrew Tate doesn't even practice some of the basics of Islam. He appears to love the misogynistic side, that's for sure. He's unmarried, engages in premarital relationships, and has children born out of wedlock. These are lifestyle choices that blatantly contradict Islamic teachings he now claims to uphold. Suddenly, he's against porn, despite building his empire on it, profiting from the exploitation of women, and teaching others how to do the same. It's like a vegan opening a steakhouse and preaching the benefits of tofu on the side. And if you can't stay away from things explicitly forbidden in Islam, you have to wonder, does he even bother with the basics like praying 5 times a day? And his newfound Muslim followers, They're not spiritual comrades, they're just fresh fodder for the real world, a ready-made audience to funnel into his $50 a month online university, and cavalry to call upon to create TikTok edits and spread propaganda. But once in a while, the mask does tend to slip, and when it does, it's equal part hilarious and revealing. Because at his core, Andrew Tate isn't a savior or a symbol, he's a salesman, selling borrowed faith, toxic fantasies, and the illusion of power to those desperate enough to buy in. He claims to fight the corruption of the modern world, but he's not its cure, he's its mirror, a reflection of all the hypocrisy, greed, and emptiness he claims to stand against. And as the facade fades, what's left isn't a warrior or a martyr, just a man who mastered the art of selling shadows in a world desperate for light. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and give the video a like. I'd also love to hear your thoughts, so drop a comment below and let me know what you think. A huge thank you to my current channel members and Patreon supporters. Your support makes all of this possible, and if you'd like to join them, consider becoming a member by hitting the join button below or heading over to Patreon. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.